The council hall of Evros Prime stood silent. Not the silence of diplomacy, not the hush of respect, but a silence thick with the weight of absence, because the human chair gleaming steel with a small earth flag etched into the armrest was empty, and it wasn't coming back. The first time in 1,000 cycles, the Galactic Council had no human delegate present. Somehow, despite the 1,000 other voices, species, and civilizations gathered in the Grand Chamber, that single absence screamed louder than any protest. At the center of the amphitheater, High Mediator Jalorn clicked his mandibles in irritation. The glare from his 8 crystalline eyes swept over the assembly like searchlights. "Let it be noted for the record," he rasped, "that the Terran Union has formally withdrawn from all peace negotiations concerning the Halvax border dispute." No one clapped, no one moved, because everyone knew what it meant. The humans hadn't just walked away from one debate. They had withdrawn from all peace talks, trade mediations, border disputes, non-aggression pacts, mutual defense treaties. They weren't absent, they were done. And now the galaxy had to live with that. It had started with a lie. Or rather, a truth no one wanted to hear. 3 cycles ago, human delegates warned the Council that the Halvax Empire, officially at peace, was quietly mobilizing war fleets. Terraformers vanished. Civilian ships stopped broadcasting. Patrol routes bent unnaturally toward neutral zones. The humans had seen it before. Their analysts flagged the data. Their diplomats spoke up. But the Council, in its endless bureaucracy, called it speculative. The Halvax Ambassadora, shimmering obsidian massed with offense. Baseless human paranoia, it said. A culture built on war cannot fathom peace. So the Council hushed the humans, shuffled the issue, buried it under protocol. 3 months later, 5 neutral worlds lay burning, not claimed, not occupied. Burned. The Halvax hadn't expanded. They had cleansed. And now, humanity had stopped talking. Earth's response wasn't military. Not at first. It was silence, followed by red lights across every interstellar relay. Human embassies shut down. Communication buoys went dark. Even trusted allies found their messages met with automated replies. The Terran Union is undergoing internal reevaluation. Diplomatic services are suspended until further notice. Behind the scenes, entire sectors once patrolled by human peacekeepers went quiet. Pirates and opportunists rejoiced until they realized the humans hadn't left. They'd just changed their posture. Surveillance networks hardened. Stations vanished from sensors. And when raiders tried to test the silence, they disappeared. Ships found floating with their weapons fused, their crews unharmed, but mute with terror. It wasn't war. It was withdrawal. It was terrifying. Few in the galaxy understood what the humans truly were. Too many, they were unpredictable, loud, too emotional. But those who studied history knew better. Humans weren't just warriors. They were mediators. The only species that had successfully brokered peace between the Vortellan and the Storned civilizations at war for 7 millennia. The only ones who had dissolved the Xenerch slave empires without firing a shot. The only ones who could sit across from ancient enemies and make both sides feel heard. They were messy, but they listened. Now without them, old scars flared open. Border tensions reignited. Races once kept in careful balance began to shift dangerously. Words grew sharp. Accusations flew. And every attempt to fix it, to hold talks, met with failure. Because every room was missing one voice, and that voice had always known how to lie when it needed peace, and tell the truth when no one else dared. There were species that understood what was coming. The Fshar, the insectoid scholars of memory. The Solari, who saw probability like maps. Korosh, who measured threat by what wasn't said. They all came to the same conclusion, separately. The humans weren't just angry, they were grieving. And that was far, far worse. Because an angry human might debate, might protest, might bargain. But a grieving one, they removed themselves. Not out of weakness, but out of bitter calculation. When they came back with decisions already made. The Halvax should have stopped. They should have halted expansion after the Second World burned. But they saw humanity's silence as weakness, saw the Council's dithering as permission. They pressed farther. They crossed into Terran-aligned space. They deployed shadow fleets. They whispered to the stars, "The humans will not interfere." They were right. Humans didn't interfere. They watched. They waited. until a Halvax destroyer vaporized a refugee convoy bearing the Terran flag, and in that moment, something ancient cracked. Not in policy, not in law, but in intention. The humans had withdrawn from the talks, but they hadn't left the war. The absence of humanity echoed louder than any declaration of war. After the withdrawal, the Galactic Council chambers became quieter, not in noise, but in spirit. The subtle tension that once accompanied human diplomats, that ever-present gravity they brought into the room, had vanished, and in its place, confusion. Galactic species, many who had dismissed humanity as a troublesome experiment or political irritant, now found themselves unable to focus. Meetings derailed over minor linguistic interpretations. Agreements that once passed with human mediation now devolved into endless bickering. It wasn't just what humans said, it was what they understood. They bridged metaphors across species, they smoothed over cultural slights before they became diplomatic chasms. They translated emotion into action, logic into compromise. Now the council sat with their own silence, and in that silence deals died. Shattered Zona volatile border region between 6 mid-tier empires had always been a powder keg. But for decades, it remained strangely stable. Why? A forgotten clause. A minor human-penned interstellar arbitration agreement hidden within the Peace Codex, written by a junior Earth diplomat named Vera Chan. The clause was designed to handle cyclical trade violations without escalating into interstellar war. But no one had noticed it was expiring, until now. Without humans to maintain and renew the clause, the treaties lapsed. And with that, old insults resurfaced. Within days, a dozen military skirmishes broke out in disputed space. Fleets mobilized. Civilian evacuation zones expanded, and the Council had no human negotiator to stop it. A single slip of bureaucracy was now fueling war. The Council scrambled to control the narrative. But even their best-trained diplomats, some centuries old, couldn't diffuse what a 20-year-old human once handled with a single paragraph. The Terran embassy on Galactica Prime had always been a quiet, minimalist outpost. No banners, no military guards. It's just a few steel buildings, a neutral garden, and a glass meeting dome where humans once offered peace over tea and broken translation software. Now it was closed. The doors were sealed, the systems deactivated. The ambassador's chair, once always warm with presence, sat cold in the nightlight of twin moons. But what unnerved the Council most wasn't the closure. It was that humanity left no demands, no warnings, no threats. It's just absence. Species that thrived on conflict at least understood enemies. But humanity left only mystery. And in that vacuum, speculation bred fear. Was this strategic retreat? Is this a precursor to something worse? They hadn't withdrawn in anger. They had withdrawn in disappointment. And that made every species on the Council nervous, because disappointed humans were far more dangerous than enraged ones. Out in the darker arms of the spiral, far from the polished council chambers, whispers began. Traitors and pirates, smugglers and information brokers, those who dealt in secrets more than truth, began noticing a disturbing trend. Humans weren't just silent in diplomacy, they were silent everywhere. Military outposts went dark, trade deals were canceled, private fleets returned home, corporations dissolved interstellar subsidiaries. Even the Terran peacekeeping forces renowned for halting genocides across distant worlds disappeared from conflict zones. They were withdrawing from the galaxy, not just the Council, and in the void, lesser empires grew bold. Slavers re-emerged, resource skirmishes escalated. The vacuum humanity left behind was quickly filled by chaos. The whisper markets did what they always did, spun rumor into gold, and the rumor now. Earth is done playing nice. Among the Council's most valuable tools were the Tellary empaths, biological telepaths capable of sensing emotional fields. One was summoned to the Council to explain what the humans had felt during their withdrawal. She stood silently for several minutes before speaking. I felt betrayal, not toward themselves, but toward us. They believed in this galaxy, and now they don't. One of the Korthon senators barked. So, let them sulk on their planet. They'll come crawling back. The Tellaris eyes shimmered. You misunderstand. When a human stops believing, they don't crawl. They rebuild. Stronger, wiser, alone if they must. A hush fell over the chamber. She continued, "They're not angry. They're disappointed. And that is the last emotion you'll feel from them. After that, nothing." The Senate session ended early that day. One wanted to ask what came after nothing. Across thousands of systems, the absence of Earth was more than political. It was cultural, emotional, philosophical. Human films stopped circulating. Their books, once loved for their chaotic creativity, vanished from learning systems. Their music no longer played in station lounges. Even species who once mocked humans for their emotionality now found themselves missing the madness. Because in a galaxy full of logic and legacy, humans were the wild card, the ones who dared to question ancient truths, the ones who made enemies become allies, the ones who challenged stagnant empires to dream again. And without them, the galaxy felt colder, older, predictable. The Galactic Council, in all its grand arrogance, had made a simple mistake. It had assumed Earth needed them. Now, as star systems braced for chaos, they finally asked the forbidden question aloud. What if we needed Earth more than it ever needed us? The worlds closest to Earth anchor worlds, they were called, had long depended on human presence, not through conquest or control, but through trust. Earth had no empire, but its influence was gravity itself. Colonies stabilized when humans invested. Stations cooperated when Terran engineers fixed the systems. Treaties held when Earth diplomats gave them weight. Now, those worlds were fracturing. On the trade moon of Volumcara, once home to 10 interspecies markets, violence erupted over tariffs once smoothed by a single Terran arbitrator. On Lorenia Station, a neural plague broke containment. A cure existed, developed on Earth. But distribution protocols had relied on human logistics networks that no longer answered calls. The Council tried patching holes, but Earth had never patched things. It had stitched. With humanity gone, the threads of trust unraveled, and the anchor worlds began to drift. Long ago, the galaxy fought to exterminate a terrifying enemy, the Kargol post-organic devourers of all biomass, believed extinct. They weren't. The Council's border outposts in Sector Red 17 sent distress signals. Kargol probes had returned. Small, testing, evolving. In the past, the Council had panicked, but it was Earth that turned panic into unity. Terran strategists had created the Ember Rings, a system of rapid response fleets, scout clouds, and interspecies military drills that stood watch for centuries. But the Ember Rings were human-led, and now they were off. By the time the Council reactivated their archives, it was too late. One planetary biosphere was consumed in 13 hours. No plan worked. No simulation predicted the Kargol's mutations, because only Terranais had anticipated this exact outcome.
Only
Terran minds had imagined such darkness. And now those minds weren't answering the call. Among the many races of the Galactic Council, one stood silent for generations, the Varelian chorus. They were mute, communicating only through light and vibration. Only one species had ever translated them fluently: humanity. A single human woman, Dr. Naya Keller, had cracked their linguistic code through months of resonance study. Since then, all Varelian diplomatic channels had passed through Earth. Now, without humans, the chorus was unintelligible again. And yet, in a dramatic council session, the Varelians appeared, flashing, pulsing, vibrating in desperate fury. No one understood. Ships were seen fleeing their sector. Some claimed the Kargol were moving through their region. Others said the chorus had developed a superweapon and were warning the galaxy. But without humans, no one could say for sure. And as the Varelians screamed in silence, the Council felt a new horror. Without Earth, entire species were becoming isolated once more. At the University of Ralix, a young analyst presented a forbidden theory. The Council never controlled peace. Earth did. Her name was Vel Etron, a half-Sylvan Xena historian. She stood in front of her faculty, shaking as she projected graphs and data models. Her findings were chilling. When humans rose, interstellar conflict dropped 87%. Piracy declined. Trade fairness increased. Education networks bloomed. Even art flourished. The data had always been there, but filtered, ignored, or buried. She called it the Terra hypothesis, that humanity, for all its chaos and flaws, was not merely a participant in galactic civilization, It was the catalyst of cohesion. Her paper was banned the next day, but it leaked. From the outer colonies to the core worlds, a new question bloomed in every troubled mind. Was peace ever real? Or was it just humanity's illusion holding it all together? In the High Hall, where the galaxy's most powerful met, an emergency vote was held. Behind sealed doors, away from media or planetary observers, the council debated one question. Should they call Earth back? Not beg, not grovel, but offer concessions. Apologies, a new seat equal to the founding species. Trade reparations, war amnesty, anything to restore balance. The vote passed. Barely. Some still believed Earth was bluffing. Others feared losing power. Enough leaders, scared and sobered, voted for the motion. The message was sent, encrypted, respectful, humble. The council waited and waited, no reply. Earth had received the message, that much they knew. But nothing came back. And that was when the council finally understood. Humanity had not left the room. It had closed the door. Back on Earth, deep beneath the Andes, an ancient fallback plan reactivated. The Earthline Protocol. It was designed for one outcome: total diplomatic failure. In hidden bunkers, old Terran ambassadors met with generals, scientists, and sociologists. Not to plan revenge, not to wage war, but to build anew. They began designing the human web, a decentralized galactic network, independent of council oversight. They reopened contact with frontier species that had been too small to be heard. They traded not in currency but trust, protection, and shared survival. They didn't make demands, they made offers. And species one by one began to respond. Quietly, secretly, because the galaxy had begun to see. The council ruled with history, but humanity led with hope, and even in the dark. Hope moves faster than light. The question now echoed across the galaxy. What does Earth want? But Earth had gone silent, not out of rage but calculation. Inside the United Terran Assembly, beneath oceans and atop orbital spires, humanity's brightest minds did not argue or shout. They listened to silence, data streams, intercepted council chatter, and the fractures forming at galactic seams. The withdrawal had not been a tantrum, it was a test. Would the galaxy build peace without them? Could it? Now, the results were clear. It couldn't. Entire species had stopped engaging in council sessions. Communication protocols built around Terran translation standards were failing. Interstellar shipping lanes, once protected by neutral Terran convoys, fell to pirates or policy gridlock. The architects of absence watched it all, and waited for the moment not to return, but to rebuild. The outer charter worlds were the first to break. These were the small planets and stations granted provisional status by the Galactic Council, tiny civilizations with unique cultures, dreams, and inventions. Earth had always been their fiercest defender. But without Terran advocacy, the bureaucratic claws came back. Mining rights were revoked, trade licenses rewritten, cultural protections ignored. The Zahari Drift, the last sky singers of their kind, had their star choruses outlawed again. Protests began, and without Earth to mediate, the protests turned violent. Council enforcers arrived. One outer charter world, Narix 5, defied the mandates. People rallied under a banner Earth had once gifted them, a white flag bearing the constellation of Sol. They called it the flag of dignity. When the council warships opened fire, the world fell. But its last broadcast echoed across 6 arms of the galaxy. We never had power, but Earth gave us voice. And now that you've silenced it, we remember what it cost to speak. In the chaos, an old enemy returned, not one of war, but of ideals. The Rogue Accord. Once a fringe alliance of planetary systems that rejected council authority, they had long operated in shadows. But after Earth's departure, they grew bold. What changed? They began quoting Terran doctrine. They cited old human texts about free will, planetary sovereignty, and ethical autonomy, documents Earth had once quietly gifted to minor civilizations. The Rogue Accord did not claim to be allies of Earth, but they claimed inspiration. They marched not with armies, but with principles Earth had once embodied: fairness, self-determination, transparency. Suddenly, rebellion wasn't just about resistance. It was about rediscovery. And the Council realized, far too late, that Earth had not just seeded technology or peace treaties across the stars. It had seeded philosophy, and that philosophy now had teeth. What the Council never expected was that the smallest things would break first. Time. Galactic Standard Time had always run on a Terran-based algorithm because human seconds, rotations, and oscillation calibrations had been the most universally adaptable. When Earth withdrew, so did the planetary servers maintaining those systems. Backup systems failed to align. Entire civilizations began missing meetings, cargo launches, even diplomatic windows, because clocks no longer agreed. Council sessions faltered. Treaties expired before renewals. Warships collided at miscalculated rendezvous. Time itself fractured. The Council scrambled, begging Earth for temporary calibration access. The Terran response came in 8 precise syllables. Build your own clock. Keep your own time. That phrase became legend because it wasn't about seconds. It was about sovereignty. Then came the shift. The Veil Lift Treaty was proposed by 3 minor species, the Heteri, the Venic, and the Myrene. For centuries, their home systems had been locked behind Council-sanctioned observation walls. Restricted from full participation due to developmental delay, Earths had always opposed such isolation. Now, without Earth, the 3 peoples rose. They defied the walls. They opened their gates. They offered their technologies to anyone who would trade, even if the Council called it illegal. And behind their veil, they had advanced, wildly, beautifully. Their architecture bent light like silk. Their sciences merged soul and quantum mechanics. Their cultures were not primitive, they were different, and they wanted to join Earth's new web. The Veil Lift Treaty was signed, not by a Council body, but by a Terran envoy operating from an independent listening station beyond the Crab Nebula. It wasn't political, it was personal. Humanity had left the Empire, but not the people. For months, rumors swirled of ships unmarked, massive and silent seen, skimming the void between systems. They didn't broadcast Council codes. They didn't respond to hails. They didn't fire. They simply appeared and vanished. Some said it was a new pirate syndicate. Others believed it was Earth's warfleet reactivating in secret. Then came the encounter over Arlux Prime. A Council dreadnought chasing slavers was suddenly overtaken. Not fired upon, but shut down. In an instant, the slaver vessels were neutralized. Their crews were rescued. The dreadnought was repaired. No words spoken, no banner shown. Just one thing left behind, a single Terran food ration box. Standard issue marked, for the undeserved. The galaxy named them what they feared, the Ghost Fleet. No one knew who commanded it. But every suffering world began scanning the stars, hoping it would come next. The Galactic Council, now fragmented and fractious, attempted one last show of unity. A summit was called. Emergency. Mandatory attendance. The agenda was simple. Restore order. But when the vote commenced, no majority could form, because many representatives had stopped showing up. Others had switched alliances mid-session. Some cast their votes in Earth Standard, others in obsolete Galactic Time, and then came the final twist. The Terran delegate seat was empty, but it still had veto power. Council had never revoked it. They simply assumed Earth would never return. When the motion was blocked by a veto that no one had activated, a realization rippled through the chambers. Earth hadn't left. Earth was watching. Somewhere, somehow, they still held the strings. In a quiet chamber aboard a drifting Terran black site, station long erased from official charts, a meeting took place. No press, no Council observers. Just emissaries from a handful of breakaway worlds, rogue accords, and exiled scientists. The meeting wasn't about revenge, it was about design. Because Earth had realized something terrifying. The Galactic Council had not been built to fail. And so it could never truly change. The Silence Accord was drafted on agreement between civilizations not to speak, shout, or demand, but to reimagine. It was the foundation of a new network, one built not from dominance, but from shared resilience. No capital planet, no central government, it's just alliances, fractals, options, and at the edge of every node, a human smile. In desperation, the Galactic Council cracked down harder. Sanctions, blockades, surveillance. On the world of Trellianix, protests erupted against the Council's forced labor policies. Earth had once protected their right to self-govern. Now they were alone. So they made a choice no one expected. Set fire to their own planetary infrastructure refineries, orbital elevators, council embassies. They burned it also. No one could take it. And from the ashes, they sent a single transmission. We are not Terrans, but we learned from them. Better to live in ruins than thrive in chains. The council called it terrorism. Others called it the first independent spark. Deep in the far reaches where gravity tore at logic and time bent around ancient stars, a colony of orphans lived. They were the abandoned children of failed council projects. Species left to die on inhospitable worlds. But Earth had found them long ago. Terran android caretakers had raised them, not to be human, but to survive together. They were hybrids of hundreds of worlds. They spoke a dozen languages at once. Their bodies bore modifications both alien and Terran. And when they came of age, they declared themselves the Riftborn. And they did not ask the Council for permission. They simply arrived with fleets, ideas, and a culture no one could categorize. They bore no flag. Only this phrase: "We are what happens when no one saves you except each other." The Riftborn asked Earth for nothing. But they left an offering at Earth's edge. A single flower grown in vacuum, rooted in the code of Terran nursery drones. At the heart of Terran diplomacy had once been a system. CERES. Centralized Ethical Response Evaluation System. It advised human diplomats, filtered biases, predicted cultural clashes, was never sentient, just honest. After the withdrawal, it was shut down. But now the Rogue Accord had rebuilt it from leaked fragments, smuggled code, and whispers. They launched a new version, CERES-2AN, open source model of interspecies trust. It's no longer Terran-owned. It belonged to everyone, and it worked. Treaties stabilized, conflicts paused, empathy returned to negotiation tables. The Council declared it illegal. That made it more popular, because now peace was no longer a product of power. It was a product of understanding. And once again, Earth's fingerprints were all over it. Then something shifted. Not in the halls of power, but in the hearts of people. Cross-mining colonies, art communes, biovault arcs, and warrior culture stories began surfacing. Not of Earth's technology or military might, but of humans who had listened. A human diplomat who learned a dying species' last poem. A human child who taught an apex predator to play chess. A Terran engineer who stayed behind during a planetary quake, not to fix systems, but to hold a frightened alien's hand. Stories, not statistics. The Galactic Council had ruled through structure. But Earth had led through connection. And now that connection, untraceable, unquantifiable, was spreading again. It's not through commands, through memory, through hope. And as the stars flickered to new frequencies, the galaxy knew Earth had never vanished. It had simply let them realize what they had lost. In the Council archives, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic denial, there existed a protocol titled Human Contingency Fatinal. It had been dismissed as symbolic. A ceremonial clause from Earth's original entry treaty. It stated, should the Terran Accord be broken by betrayal, misrepresentation, or systemic dehumanization, the Earth Collective may withdraw in silence, and a door shall close.
Ow.
No one knew what the door referred to until it opened again. Not in space, but in culture. Earth released a transmission. Not to the Council, but to the people of the galaxy. A single message. You were never the audience. You were always the story. And across millions of systems, translators struggled to process it, because the transmission didn't speak in words, it spoke in memories. It encoded emotional simulations. Anyone who listened remembered Earth as if they'd lived it. Snow on a Terran mountain. A jazz bar in a ruined city. A hand reaching out, not in conquest, but in comfort. And the galaxy wept. Not because Earth returned, but because it had never truly left. Ceremonial guard legions on capital worlds stood down. Trade routes realigned to Terran-sponsored corridors. Council anthem broadcasts were replaced by street performances of human protest songs translated, adapted, reborn in alien tongues. Even among the most loyalist factions, morale collapsed. Not through violence, through irrelevance.
S.
Because every planetary broadcast now faced a terrifying truth. Their people were quoting Earth. The Council tried to ban cultural contagion. It only spread faster. Because for every law passed to suppress memory, 5 new retellings emerged. And what terrified the Council most was this. No one remembered Earth's military victories. They remembered their compassion. And compassion, once remembered, is impossible to erase. When the Terran diplomatic fleet finally re-entered known space, there was no grand announcement, no threats, just quiet arrivals, ships landing not on capital worlds, but forgotten outposts. Human diplomats didn't ask to speak to the High Council. They went to orphans, rebels, healers, exiles, and artists. And when asked why they returned, they answered, "We never left. We only waited for you to remember yourselves." Because the Terran strategy had never been to conquer or destroy. It had been to reveal, to hold up a mirror to the galaxy, and let them realize how monstrous the Council had become without the one voice that once made them hesitate. Earth had not returned in strength. It returned in trust, and it was more devastating than any fleet. The Council tried one last tactic. They staged a tribunal. Charges, abandonment, treason, subversion, the accused, the Earth Collective. But the trial backfired. Because every testimony against Earth was immediately followed by a survivor story. A child saved, a plague cured, a war prevented. Not by Council enforcement, but by some forgotten Terran outreach program, still operating in the shadows. The trial became a reckoning not of Earth's actions, but of the Council's failures. And when the presiding judge accrusted, protocol-bound Kel, ere he asked for final words from the Terran envoy, the humans simply said, "You never deserved to judge us," and left the tribunal. The audience applauded, not for Earth, but for the truth. It wasn't a war. It wasn't even a revolution. It was something older. A choice. Entire sectors began rebranding themselves as decentralized Accord territories. New cultures fused human values with native traditions. A single blue and green emblem began appearing not as a flag, but as a promise. We remember Earth. And on the day the Council demanded loyalty votes from its remaining members, only one planet responded. Not with a speech, not with a declaration, with silence, because they were already gone. The Council chambers, once so crowded with voices, echoed hollow. And in that silence, for the first time, the Council heard itself. And it was ugly. The final transmission came unexpectedly. A live broadcast from an unregistered Terran colony orbiting a nebula whose name had no vowels, just breath and color. In it stood no soldier, no president, just an old woman, Terran-born, dressed in worn diplomatic robes. She spoke calmly. "We came to offer peace, and you called it control. We came to share stories, and you called them weapons. We withdrew not in rage, but in mourning." She looked at the stars, then added, "You never needed us to lead you. You needed us to believe in you. That was our only power. And now, it's yours." She smiled, then faded from the screen. No epilogue. No conditions, just a legacy, a memory in motion. And across the galaxy, peace finally arrived. Not from Earth, but from all those who had once known Earth and remembered how to be better.